Brought to you by WikiVidi documentaries. Ethiopia. Ethiopia, officially the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, is a country located in the Horn of Africa. It shares borders with Eritrea to the north and northeast, Djibouti and Somalia to the east, Sudan and South Sudan to the west, and Kenya to the south. With over 100 million inhabitants, Ethiopia is the most populous landlocked country in the world, as well as the second most populous nation on the African continent after Nigeria. It occupies a total area of, and its capital and largest city is Addis Ababa. Some of the oldest evidence for anatomically modern humans has been found in Ethiopia. It is widely considered as the region from which modern humans first set out for the Middle East and places beyond. According to linguists, the first Afro-Asiatic-speaking populations settled in the Horn region during the ensuing Neolithic era, tracing its roots to the 2nd millennium BC. Ethiopia was a monarchy for most of its history. During the first centuries AD, the Kingdom of Aksum maintained a unified civilization in the region, followed by the Ethiopian Empire circa 1137. Ethiopia derived prestige with its uniquely successful military resistance during the late 19th century scramble for Africa, becoming the only African country to defeat a European colonial power and retain its sovereignty. Subsequently, many African nations adopted the colors of Ethiopia's flag following their independence. It was the first independent African member of the 20th Century League of Nations and the United Nations. In 1974, at the end of Haile Selassie's reign, power fell to a communist military dictatorship known as the Derg, backed by the Soviet Union, until it was defeated by the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, which has ruled since about the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Ethiopia's ancient GEZ script, also known as Ethiopic, is one of the oldest alphabets still in use in the world. The Ethiopian calendar, which is approximately 7 years and 3 months behind the Gregorian calendar, coexists alongside the Barana calendar. A majority of the population adheres to Christianity, while around a third follows Islam. The country is the site of the migration to Abyssinia, and the oldest Muslim settlement in Africa at Nagash. A substantial population of Ethiopian Jews, known as Bet Israel, resided in Ethiopia until the 1980s, but most of them have since emigrated to Israel. Ethiopia is a multilingual nation with around 80 ethno-linguistic groups, the 4 largest of which are the Oromifa, Amhara, Somali, and Tigrayans. Most people in the country speak Afro-Asiatic languages of the Kurdic Semitic branches. Additionally, Omotic languages are spoken by ethnic minority groups inhabiting the southern regions. Nilo-Saharan languages are also spoken by the nation's Nilotic ethnic minorities. Ethiopia is the place of origin for the coffee bean, which originated from the place called Kefir. It is a land of natural contrasts, with its vast fertile west, jungles, and numerous rivers, and the world's hottest settlement of Dalol in its north. The Ethiopian highlands are Africa's largest continuous mountain ranges, and Omar caves contain Africa's largest cave. Ethiopia has the most UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Africa. Ethiopia is one of the founding members of the UN, the Group of 24, the Non-Aligned Movement, G77 and the Organization of African Unity. Ethiopia's capital city Addis Ababa serves as the headquarters of the African Union, the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, African Aviation Training HQ, the African Standby Force, and many of the global NGOs focused on Africa. In the 1970s and 1980s, Ethiopia suffered from civil wars and communist purges which devastated its economy. The country has begun to recover recently, however, and now has the largest economy in East and Central Africa. According to Global Firepower, Ethiopia has the 42nd most powerful military in the world, and the 3rd most powerful in Africa. Nomenclature. The Greek name Alpha Theta Iota Omicron Pi Iota Alpha is a compound word, derived from the two Greek words, from plus. The historian Herodotus used the appellation to denote the parts of Africa below the Sahara that were then known within the Ecumen. In Greco-Roman epigraphs, Ethiopia was a specific toponym for ancient Nubia, at least as early as c. 850. The name Ethiopia also occurs in many translations of the Old Testament in allusion to the latter territory. The ancient Hebrew texts identify Nubia instead as Cush. However, in the New Testament, the Greek term Ethiops does occur, referring to a servant of Candace, or Candake, possibly an inhabitant of Meroe in Nubia. Following the Hellenic and biblical traditions, the Monumentum Adulitanum, a 3rd century inscription belonging to the Aksumite Empire, indicates that Aksum's then ruler governed an area which was flanked to the west by the territory of Ethiopia and Sassu. The Aksumite king Ezana would eventually conquer Nubia the following century, and the Aksumites thereafter appropriated the designation Ethiopians for their own kingdom. In the GEEZ version of the Ezana inscription, A theta iota omicron pi omicron iota is equated with the unvocalized BSTM and BST, and denotes for the first time the highland inhabitants of Aksum. This new demonym would subsequently be rendered as HBS in Sabaic and as Abasha in Arabic. In the 15th century GEEZ Book of Aksum, the name is ascribed to a legendary individual called Eteopes. He was an extra-biblical son of Cush, son of Ham, said to have founded the city of Aksum. In English, and generally outside of Ethiopia, the country was once historically known as Abyssinia. This toponym was derived from the Latinized form of the ancient Abash. Prehistory. Several important finds have propelled Ethiopia and the surrounding region to the forefront of paleontology. The oldest hominid discovered to date in Ethiopia is the 4.2 million year old Ardipithecus ramidus found by Tim D. White in 1994. The most well-known hominid discovery is Australopithecus afarensis, known locally as Dinky Nesh. The specimen was found in the Awash Valley of Ethiopia's Afar region in 1974 by Donald Johansson, and is one of the most complete and best-preserved adult Australopithecine fossils ever uncovered. Lucy's taxonomic name refers to the region where the discovery was made. The hominid is estimated to have lived 3.2 million years ago. Ethiopia is also considered the site of the emergence of anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, in the Middle Paleolithic about 200,000 years ago. The earliest known modern human bones were found in southwestern Ethiopia, and are called the Omo remains. Additionally, skeletal remains of Homo sapiens idol II were found at a site in the Middle Awash in Ethiopia, dated to approximately 160,000 years ago. They may represent an extinct subspecies of Homo sapiens, or the immediate ancestors of anatomically modern humans. According to linguists, the first Afro-Asiatic-speaking populations arrived in the region during the ensuing Neolithic era, from the families Proposa Heimat in the Nile Valley, or the Near East. Other scholars propose that the Afro-Asiatic family developed in situ in the Horn, with its speakers subsequently dispersing from there. Craniometric analysis of the Hairto-Homo Haile II skull found that the fossil was morphologically distinct from crania belonging to modern Afro-Asiatic-speaking populations from the Horn of Africa and dynastic Egypt, which instead possessed Middle Eastern affinities. This suggests that the Afro-Asiatic-speaking groups settled in the area during a later epoch. Antiquity. Around the 8th century BC, a kingdom known as D-Mount was established in northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. The polity's capital was located at Yeha, in northern Ethiopia. Most modern historians consider this civilization to be a native Ethiopian one, although Sabian-influenced because of the latter's hegemony of the Red Sea. Other scholars regard D-Mount as the result of a union of Afro-Asiatic-speaking cultures of the Cushitic and Semitic branches, namely, local Agar peoples and Sabians from South Arabia. However, Ge'ez, the ancient Semitic language of Ethiopia, is thought to have developed independently from Sabian, one of the South Semitic languages. As early as 2000 BC, other Semitic speakers were living in Ethiopia and Eritrea, where Ge'ez developed. Sabian influence is now thought to have been minor, limited to a few localities, and disappearing after a few decades or a century. It may have been a trading or military colony in alliance with the Ethiopian civilization of D-Mount, or some other Proto-Aksumite state. After the fall of D-Mount during the 4th century BC, the plateau came to be dominated by smaller successor kingdoms. In the 1st century AD, the kingdom of Aksum emerged in what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. According to the medieval Book of Aksum, the kingdom's first capital, Mazaba, was built by Eteopes, son of Cush. Aksum would later, at times, extend its rule into Yemen on the other side of the Red Sea. The Persian religious figure Mani listed Aksum with Rome, Persia, and China as one of the four great powers of his era. During the 3rd century, around 316 AD, Frumentius and his brother Odysseus from Tyre accompanied their uncle on a voyage to Ethiopia. When the vessel stopped at a Red Sea port, the natives killed all the travelers except the two brothers, who were taken to the court as slaves. They were given positions of trust by the monarch, and they converted members of the royal court to Christianity. Frumentius became the first bishop of Aksum. A coin dated to 324 shows that Ethiopia was the second country to officially adopt Christianity, although the religion may have been at first confined to court circles. It was the first major power to do so, as the Aksumite kingdom gradually declined. One of the earliest local Muslim states, the Makhzumi Sultanate, was established in the Shewa region. The polity was governed by the Makhzumi dynasty, which reigned over the province until it was deposed around 1280 by the Walaashma dynasty. During Muhammad's era, the first interaction that the Islamic prophet Muhammad had with Ethiopia was during the reign of Ashama ibn Abjar, who was at the time the emperor of Aksum and gave refuge to several Muslims in the kingdom of Aksum in 614 AD. According to other authors, Ashama may have been the same person as King Ammar, or his father as son. Tadesi Tamrit records that the inhabitants of Wikro, where the ruler is known as Ashamat al-Nagashi, claim that his tomb is located in the village. Muhammad's second interaction with Ethiopia was during the expedition of Zayd ibn Haritha, when he sent Amr bin Umayyah al-Damri to the king of Ethiopia. In a letter from Muhammad to the king of Aksum, Muhammad invites the ruler and his men to follow his message. and believe in Allah. When this letter was presented to the king, he took the parchment and allegedly placed it on his eye, descended to the floor and confessed his faith in Islam. Middle Ages. The Zagwe dynasty ruled many parts of present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea between the early 12th and late 13th century. The name of the dynasty is derived from the Kosgetic-speaking Agar of northern Ethiopia. From 1270 AD until the Zemene Mesafint, the Solomonic dynasty governed the Ethiopian Empire. In the early 15th century, Ethiopia sought to make diplomatic contact with European kingdoms for the first time since the Aksumite era. A letter from Henry IV of England to the Emperor of Abyssinia survives. In 1428, Yeshak I sent two emissaries to Alfonso V of Aragon, who sent return emissaries. They failed to complete the return trip. The first continuous relations with a European country began in 1508, with Portugal under De Witt II, who had just inherited the throne from his father. This proved to be an important development, for when the empire was subjected to the attacks of the Adil Sultanate's general and imam, Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, Portugal assisted the Ethiopian emperor by sending weapons and 400 men, who helped his son Georges defeat Ahmad and re-establish his rule. This Abyssinian-Adil War was also one of the first proxy wars in the region, as the Ottoman Empire and Portugal took sides in the conflict. When Emperor Susanoo I converted to Roman Catholicism in 1624, years of revolt and civil unrest followed, resulting in thousands of deaths. The Jesuit missionaries had offended the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo faith of the local Ethiopians. In June 1632, Fasilides, Susanoo's son, declared the state religion again to be the Ethiopian Orthodoxy. He expelled the Jesuit missionaries and other Europeans. Aussa Sultanate. The Sultanate of Aussa, or Afar Sultanate, succeeded the earlier Imamate of Aussa. The latter polity had come into existence in 1577 when Muhammad Jasser moved his capital from Hara to Aussa with the split of the Adil Sultanate into the Sultanate of Aussa and the Sultanate of Hara. At some point after 1672, the Sultanate of Aussa declined and temporarily came to an end in conjunction with Imam Umayyad bin Adam's recorded ascension to the throne. The Sultanate was subsequently re-established by Khedive around the year 1734. It was thereafter ruled by his Mudarito dynasty. The primary symbol of the Sultan was a silver baton, which was considered to have magical properties. Zemene Mesafint. Between 1755 and 1855, Ethiopia experienced a period of isolation referred to as the Zemene Mesafint, or Age of Princes. The emperors became figureheads, controlled by warlords like Ras Mikhail Sehul of Tigray, Ras Haile Selassie of Tigray, and by the Yeju Oromo dynasty, such as Ras Gugsa of Yeju, which later led to 17th-century Oromo rule of Gondar, changing the language of the court from Amharic to Afan Oromo. Ethiopian isolationism ended following a British mission that concluded an alliance between the two nations, but it was not until 1855 that Ethiopia was completely united and the power in the emperor restored, beginning with the reign of Tewodros II. Upon his ascent, he began modernizing Ethiopia and re-centralizing power in the emperor. Ethiopia began to take part in world affairs once again. But Tewodros suffered several rebellions inside his empire. Northern Oromo militias, Tigrayan rebellion, and the constant incursion of Ottoman Empire and Egyptian forces near the Red Sea brought the weakening and the final downfall of Tewodros II. He killed himself in 1868 during his last battle with the British expedition to Abyssinia. Emperor Tewodros II was born in Bigemda from a nobleman of Kwara, where the Kwara dialect of Agar language is spoken. After Tewodros' death, Tekelge August II was proclaimed emperor. He was defeated in the battles of Zulawu and Adwa. Kasai was subsequently declared Johannes IV on 21 January 1872. In 1875 and 1876, Turkish, Egyptian forces, accompanied by many European and American advisors, twice invaded Abyssinia, but were initially defeated, once at the Battle of Gunday losing 800 men, and then in the second invasion, decisively defeated by Emperor Johannes IV. At the Battle of Gura on 7 March 1875, where the invading forces lost at least 3,000 men by death or captured. From 1885 to 1889, Ethiopia joined the Mahdist War allied to Britain, Turkey, and Egypt against the Sudanese Mahdist state. On 10 March 1889, Yonan IV was killed by the Sudanese Khalifa Abdullah's army whilst leading his army in the Battle of Galabat. From Menelik II to Adwa, 1889 to 1913. Ethiopia in its roughly current form began under the reign of Menelik II, who was emperor from 1889 until his death in 1913. From his base in the central province of Shewa, Menelik set out to annex territories to the south, east and west, areas inhabited by the Oromo, Sidama, Gurage, Welaita, and other groups. He did this with the help of Rasko Barnadach's Shuin Oromo militia, which occupied lands that had not been held since Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi's war, as well as other areas that had never been under Ethiopian sovereignty. Menelik's campaign against Oromos outside his army was largely in retaliation for centuries of Oromo expansionism and the Zemene Mesafint, a period during which a succession of Oromo feudal rulers dominated the highlanders. Chief among these was the Yeju dynasty, which included Ali Gaz of Yeju and his brother Ali I of Yeju. Ali I founded the town of Debre Tabor in the Amhara region, which became the dynasty's capital. Menelik was born from King Haile Selassie of Shewa, and his mother Ajega Yehulima Adiyamo, who was a servant in the royal household. He had been born at Angolala in an Oromo area and had lived his first 12 years with Shuin Oromos, with whom he thus had much in common. During his reign, Menelik II made advances in road construction, electricity and education, the development of a central taxation system, and the foundation and building of the city of Addis Ababa, which became capital of Shewa province in 1881. After he ascended to the throne in 1889, it was renamed as Addis Ababa, the new capital of Abyssinia. Menelik had signed the Treaty of Wuchale with Italy in May 1889, in which Italy would recognize Ethiopia's sovereignty so long as Italy could control an area north of Ethiopia. In return, Italy was to provide Menelik with weapons and support him as emperor. The Italians used the time between the signing of the treaty and its ratification by the Italian government to expand their territorial claims. This conflict erupted in the Battle of Adwa on 1 March 1896, in which Italy's colonial forces were defeated by the Ethiopians. About a third of the population died in the Great Ethiopian Famine. Haile Selassie I era, 1916 to 1974. The early 20th century was marked by the reign of Emperor Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie I was born to parents from three of Ethiopia's Afro-Asiatic-speaking populations, the Oromo and Amhara, the country's two largest ethnic groups, as well as the Gurage. He came to power after Iyasu V was deposed, and undertook a nationwide modernization campaign from 1916, when he was made a Rasan regent for the Empress Regnant, Zuda II, and became the de facto ruler of the Ethiopian Empire. Following Zudita's death on 2 November 1930, he succeeded her as emperor. The independence of Ethiopia was interrupted by the Second Italo-Ethiopian War, beginning when it was invaded by Fascist Italy in early October 1935, and Italian occupation of the country. During this time, Haile Selassie appealed to the League of Nations in 1935, delivering an address that made him a worldwide figure, and the 1935 Time Man of the Year. In May 1936, the metropolitan center of Ethiopian cities were occupied. As the majority of the Ethiopian population lived in rural towns, Italy faced continued resistance and ambushes in urban centers throughout its occupation. Haile Selassie fled into exile in London, and Mussolini was able to proclaim the Empire of Ethiopia and the assumption of the imperial title by the Italian King Vittorio Emanuele III, recognized by the countries belonging to the International Organization of the League of Nations. In 1937, the Italian massacre of Yekata 12 occurred. This was when there were imprisonments and massacre of Ethiopians. This was because of a failed attempt to assassinate the Viceroy of Italian East Africa Rodolfo Graziani. Following the entry of Italy into World War II, British Empire forces, together with the Arbegnok, restored sovereignty of Ethiopia in the course of the East African Campaign in 1941. An Italian guerrilla campaign continued until 1943. This was followed by British recognition of Ethiopia's full sovereignty, with the signing of the Anglo-Ethiopian Agreement in December 1944. On 26 August 1942, Haile Selassie issued a proclamation that removed Ethiopia's legal basis for slavery. Ethiopia had between 2 and 4 million slaves in the early 20th century, out of a total population of about 11 million. In 1952, Haile Selassie orchestrated the federation with Eritrea. He dissolved this in 1962, and annexed Eritrea, which resisted and finally won its War of Independence. Haile Selassie played a leading role in the formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. Opinion within Ethiopia turned against Haile Selassie I owing to the worldwide oil crisis of 1973. This oil crisis caused a sharp increase in gasoline prices starting on 13 February 1974. Food shortages, uncertainty regarding the succession, border wars, and discontent in the middle class created through modernization. The high gasoline prices motivated the taxi drivers and teachers to go on strike on 18 February 1974, and students and workers in Addis Ababa began demonstrating against the government on 20 February 1974. The feudal oligarchical cabinet of Akilu Habte Wald was toppled, and a new government was formed, with Ndelkachi Makonnen serving as prime minister. Derg era, 1974 to 1991. Haile Selassie's reign came to an end on 12 September 1974, when he was deposed by the Derg, a Soviet-backed Marxist-Leninist military dictatorship led by Mengistu Haile Mariam. The new Provisional Military Administrative Council established a one-party communist state which was called People's Democratic Republic of Ethiopia in March 1975. The ensuing regime suffered several coups, uprisings, wide-scale drought, and a huge refugee problem. In 1977, Somalia, which had been receiving assistance and arms from the USSR, invaded Ethiopia in the Ogaden War, capturing part of the Ogaden region. Ethiopia recovered it after it began receiving massive military aid from the USSR, Cuba, South Yemen, East Germany, and North Korea. This included around 15,000 Cuban combat troops. Up to 500,000 were killed as a result of the Red Terror, from forced deportations, or from the use of hunger as a weapon under Mengistu's rule. The Red Terror was carried out in response to what the government termed the White Terror, a supposed chain of violent events, assassinations, and killings attributed to the opposition. The 1983–85 famine in Ethiopia affected around 8 million people, resulting in 1 million dead. Insurrections against communist rule sprang up, particularly in the northern regions of Tigray and Eritrea. In 1989, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front merged with other ethnically based opposition movements to form the coalition known as the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front. Concurrently, the Soviet Union began to retreat from building world communism under Mikhail Gorbachev's glasnost and perestroika policies, marking a dramatic reduction in aid to Ethiopia from socialist bloc countries. This resulted in more economic hardship and the collapse of the military in the face of determined onslaughts by guerrilla forces in the north. The collapse of socialism in general, and in Eastern Europe, during the revolutions of 1989, coincided with the Soviet Union stopping aid to Ethiopia altogether in 1990. The strategic outlook for Mengistu quickly deteriorated. In May 1991, EPRDF forces advanced on Addis Ababa and the Soviet Union did not intervene to save the government side. Mengistu fled the country to asylum in Zimbabwe, where he still resides. In 2006, after a trial that lasted 12 years, Ethiopia's Federal High Court in Addis Ababa found Mengistu guilty in absentia of genocide. Numerous other top leaders of his were also found guilty of war crimes. Mengistu and others who had fled the country were tried and sentenced in absentia. Numerous former officials received the death sentence, and tens of others spent the next 20 years in jail, before being pardoned from life sentences. In July 1991, EPRDF convened a national conference to establish the transitional government of Ethiopia, composed of an 87-member council of representatives and guided by a national charter that functioned as a transitional constitution. In June 1992, the Oromo Liberation Front withdrew from the government. In March 1993, members of the Southern Ethiopia People's Democratic Coalition also left the government. In 1994, a new constitution was written that established a parliamentary republic, with a bicameral legislature and a judicial system. Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.